Hello, friends and esteemed colleagues. This is your dear friend Caleb. Um, for the workshop, I chose to take a look at listening skills. The two conferences that I looked at for information on this were the 2022 ACT-FL conference and the 2022 Calico conference. So the four main points, or recommendations, maybe I should say, that I found in these two conferences are here. So I have activities, which is kind of a broad term for activity ideas and task design as they relate to teaching listening skills. There was a lot of talk about technology, which you might expect from Calico being a technology-based conference, but there was also a fair amount of discussion of technology in the ACT-FL conference as well. There were a lot of different technological ideas discussed in both of these conferences, but the main ones that I noticed were audio, video, often together, audio, video, if you will, and podcasting was a significant one as well that I thought was pretty neat. There was also a lot of discussion about authenticity, or the lack thereof, I should say, of the materials that are used for the activities. And then the final point is the idea of collaboration, which tends to promote spontaneous language use, which is an important one that was talked about. So you might notice that one of these is not like the others. And I'll get more into this later in the slideshow, but activities is a little bit broader than the rest of these, right? And the way that technology, authenticity, and collaboration were discussed were kind of as they relate to activity design, which, as you can see here on the top, in both of these conferences, there was a very, very heavy emphasis on activity recommendations and task design. Almost all of the discussions that had to do with listening were about that. And most, but not all of them, were specifically about task-based learning. I thought the best way to show you what I mean about this and the others are to just read off some examples so you can see what I mean. So this one's from a discussion called Task-Based Pragmatic Activities, Teaching How to Offer Apologies in Spanish. This session provides participants with hands-on activities that promote students' pragmatic competence using apologies in Spanish as the speech act feature. Presenters will share task-based listening and speaking activities that develop students' strategic use of the pragmatic features for Spanish-speaking cultures. And so the really functional part there is presenters will share task-based listening and speaking activities. Another one is the discussion is called Listening, the Other Interpretive Skill. And the description is, participants in this session will learn a variety of strategies for teaching and assessing interpretive listening skills. Specific pre-listening, during listening, and post-listening activities will be shared that will enable both novice and intermediate learners to increase their proficiency in interpreting authentic audio and video resources. So this is a good example of where a lot of these main points kind of bleed together. So you can see this one has to do with activity recommendations, authenticity, and technology in the form of audio and video resources. And then one more example for this one. This is from a discussion called Designing Listening Exercises from a Top-Down and Bottom-Up Perspective. And the description is, this presentation discusses the specific skills involved in the listening process from a top-down and bottom-up perspective and makes recommendations on designing listening exercises that help learners develop these concrete listening skills. So now we can move on to technology. Um, as I said a moment ago, there was certainly an emphasis on audio-video material, which had to do with most of the technology that was discussed. Um, at least for the most part, and ACTFL especially had to do with audio and video. And then the Calico conference talked a little bit about games and VR. And the biggest difference I noticed between these two discussions were the whether or not the material was authentic. Audio and video material, as was mostly discussed in the ACTFL conference, um, placed an emphasis on authentic language input for listeners. Whereas the Calico conference talked about games in VR that just based on the way that they were designed, I can assume are using scripted or inauthentic material. And so I'll share a couple examples of technology use. This one I thought was really neat. So this is from a discussion called Build Proficiency with Podcasts, Communication and Culture Across the Modes. And the description is podcasts offer numerous options to engage language learners in all modes of communication and build their intercultural competence. From interpretive listening to interpersonal discussions to learn to produce podcasts, this presentation will showcase a variety of ways podcasts and podcasting can be used to engage learners and build proficiency. As I'll talk about in the end of the discussion, there's not a lot of emphasis on learner engagement. And so I thought it was really cool for them to think about that in terms of podcasts. And so this one's from Calico. The conference or the discussion is called "Supporting Early Bilingualism with Digital Tools." Skip the beginning part. The results show that many educators and parents see limited potential of digital technologies as language development tools. However, they recognize the educational value of media resources, particularly for developing listening skills and vocabulary, and have started introducing digital language learning introduced as a supplement to traditional forms. And then one more. This one's also from Calico. Discussion is called Using Virtual Reality for Courses on Language for the Health Professions, a Demonstration. And the description is, we'll skip the first sentence. Participants will engage in either first-person mode by using a laptop or by using an Oculus Quest 2 headset. Scenarios include completing tasks such as greeting patients, collecting vital signs, listening to patient information, interacting with primary target language speakers, asking about medication and herbal remedy use, and diagnosing the patient and identifying a treatment plan. You can see in this one that there's again a little bit of overlap in terms of this being a task-based instruction method. So now let's talk about authenticity. I've already talked about it a little bit because there is a ton of overlap in these activities. There are several examples of discussions that specify teaching using authentic language. And as I mentioned before, authenticity and technology are a little bit at odds with each other, just in that it's difficult to introduce authentic language in a game. I'm starting to run out of time, so I'll maybe just share one example for authenticity. So this one's from a discussion called Authentic Audio, Scaffold the Experience and Celebrate Student Success. And the description is, presenting students with culturally diverse authentic audio is essential to the interpretive mode. This session will provide tools for scaffolding the listening experience into manageable steps through a variety of effective strategies and practices. Students are guided towards success, building confidence, greater proficiency, and rich vocabulary. I like this one especially because it makes sure to mention that culturally diverse authentic audio is important to teach listening. Which almost all of the other examples don't go into, as I touched on earlier. So then the last one, collaboration. Many activities are designed to be collaborative, and they're sure to mention that collaboration fosters spontaneous language use. And I'll just share one example for this one as well. This is from a discussion called Collaborative Listening Tasks in the German Classroom. And the description is, developing listening skills is a challenge at every level. The presenters will demonstrate collaborative in-class listening tasks using authentic audiovisual material. There's the overlap again. Implemented in a first and fourth semester German class. The tasks are easily adaptable to other educational settings while the principles of collaboration and mediation remain the same. So now let's briefly talk about some of the contexts that these activities are designed for. So the most represented language is English, as you might expect, with Spanish in a close second, especially in the Calico activities. The other more common languages discussed are German and French, and there are a couple others, for example, Chinese. And so for age groups, these are in order of from most to least. And so for the ACTFL, the most common group that the activities were designed for was post-secondary, and then all, so any age group, then high school, and then middle school. Interestingly, while a lot of these were classified for a specific age group, such as like specifically post-secondary or high school, a lot of them in the description itself mentioned that these would be suitable for any age group. And it's also worth noting that ACTFL specified the age group for all of their discussions, which cannot be said for Calico. A lot of the listening discussions that were discussed at the Calico conference were non-specific for what age groups they were designed for. Sometimes you could infer, but the only ones that they were specific about were post-secondary and elementary, and some of those were inferred just based on where the presenters taught. So to wrap things up, I'd like to briefly touch on some missed opportunities that I saw in these conferences. The biggest one being connecting with students personally. As we've learned in class, it's really important to engage students, often using their own cultural backgrounds. And while it was touched on a little bit, I would have liked to see some more of that in activity design. A lot of these were they seemed kind of dry and not rich with culture, and didn't give a lot of ideas for how to integrate your learners' cultures into it. And then another huge oversight that I saw was the vast majority of these activities are designed for high schoolers and post-secondary learners. And I would like to see some activities designed with younger learners in mind. Thanks for listening. Sorry I went a little bit over time, and I will see you all at the workshop.